Hello everyone, welcome. Today we have a very interesting surprise for you. We are going to discuss a sacred Indian classic called the UTTARA Gita. Just to give you a preliminary explanation, Gita means song, chant, and Uttara is the last chant, the terminal chant, the final chant. It is part of a sequence of works called Gitas, the so-called chants, which are generally excerpts from larger works. You may have heard of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is an excerpt from a work that is the Mahabharata, an epic par excellence of India. We have other Gitas that are part of the Mahabharata itself, such as the Anuttara and other great works, just like the Ramayana itself has its own Gita. But interestingly, the UTTARA Gita is not part of any larger work. It is a standalone work. It has an interesting characteristic because it is also a dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna, who represents the evolving human, and Krishna, representing divinity. For those familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, it is precisely an initial dialogue of this nature. Arjuna, as the leader of the Pandava princes, fighting against the Kauravas princes. And, in truth, this struggle is symbolic. It is happening within him. It is the fight of wisdom against ignorance. He is guided in the struggle by Krishna, who instructs him and reveals the reality behind, the shadows of the world. After that, in the Mahabharata itself, there is a continuation called the Anuttara, which discusses what happens after this war. The UTTARA Gita is not part of the Mahabharata. The UTTARA Gita is a separate work. It is said that Gadapada, a great Hindu master in the 6th century AD, already commented on the UTTARA Gita. Therefore, the UTTARA Gita predates this, earlier than Shankaracharya himself, meaning it dates back to a time around the 5th century, approximately. Reminding you that many times these works are part of an oral tradition until one day they are written down. This means they have an even greater antiquity, which we cannot precisely determine. So, the name UTTARA Gita refers to a final chant that follows the same idea. It is a dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. But this final chant occurs at a moment when you have a more mature Arjuna, having lived his entire life, all his experiences in the world, and he then goes and returns to Krishna's presence with one question. How can he, upon dying, free himself from reincarnation and unite with Brahma? Unite with the great mystery of the universe, the One? And this entire text, which is a small text, is a development of this idea. It is Krishna explaining to him, to an Arjuna who is now mature, who has already accomplished his work on earth. How to face another war now? Another great challenge, which is to overcome death. To overcome this transition that leads to unconsciousness and then brings us back, according to Indian tradition, which is reincarnationist. He seeks help to understand this mystery. How to no longer need to return to the world, and the entire dialogue revolves around this. Well, as I mentioned to you, I am working with the Spanish version, which is by Federico Clemente. It is a version translated from English, and it seemed more interesting to me than others I have been comparing. And this one seemed to me, let us say, a bit more sober, a bit more complete. Well, just to add a bit of curiosity for you, although as Gita, there are only these 3 works that I know of because my knowledge of Indian literature, as I mentioned to you, is what one can have given that Indian literature is vast. I will not go into details about this. This could be a lecture on its own, but there's another work that is not a Gita, which is called Dinyaneshwari, written by a master, now considered a saint, who was Dayaneshwar Maharaja. This young man who writes this beautiful dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna dies at the age of 21. And this dialogue, which is even cited by Helena Blavatsky in the introduction to The Voice of the Silence, he writes while still a teenager. He writes such a work. It carries a special dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, still in his adolescence. And he passes away at the age of 21. It's another work. He would have lived around 1275 and lived only 21 years. He is a figure who is now considered someone exceptional for the magnitude of what he was able to accomplish in such a short time. Just so that you don't say, I know one more dialogue. Yes, I know these ones too. Perhaps there are others I do not know. Dialogues between Arjuna and Krishna. The UTTARA Gita, then, is known as the Song of Initiation. Arjuna is the man who has overcome the trials of life. Now he must face the trials of death. This forgetfulness, this shadow, is produced because man is attached to everything that will die along with his body. His desires are all mortal. So, your consciousness suffers a shadow because it has nothing immortal to cling to. To remain awakened when the body stays here, since all its interests stemmed from the body. So this doubt, this questioning, which is not only Arjuna's, who among us does not live with great uneasiness in front of the ephemeral? Who among us does not have a deep hunger for eternity within? Arjuna, much more prepared than any of us, asks Krishna to clarify this mystery for him. The book is composed of 3 small sections or chapters, quite tiny. It is a small book, complex for those who are not familiar with a bit of Indian nomenclature, the Sanskrit terminology of many elements of Indian philosophical tradition. So, it might seem a bit complex. I reiterate, I do not want to bring you anything exotic. I am aiming to bring basic moral knowledge, a warning for the important aspects of life that a Western man is able to understand. There is a lot of profound content in this UTTARA Gita. There is, for example, a very interesting description of the nadis, which are the energy channels, but I will not delve into that. It remains important and interesting, but excessively complex for the Western man. I wanted to bring a digestible synthesis, something we can experience. I draw your attention because this care must be taken with everything that is called esoteric today. Personally, I do not like it when people say that what I do is esoteric, because esoteric, originally, is the essence of things. The external would be the exoteric. But today, the esoteric has become exotic. As I have seen in a joke once, the schizoteric, full of strange phrases and things that make no sense, which is sometimes taken as not very serious, and sometimes there's some truth to that, in this prejudice that has formed. Sometimes it becomes a post-concept. In other words, they've really mistreated this concept. I try to bring you something that is accessible to the Western man. Let it be an essence with a moral character. There's much more in the UTTARA Gita. I brought a small sample. Well, we will work on the search and achievement of unity. If I could summarize, you know I love to make summary. I teach a study technique course, which is vitally about knowing how to make a good summary. And the summary of this book, I would say to you, is the search and achievement of unity. It is the most important thing. And now let us get to it. Let us talk a little about the first instance. I remind you, this is not ordinary literature. It is sacred literature from a people extremely important to the history of humanity. And one of the criteria of humanity, which I draw everyone's attention to, is that what is sacred to a single person should be treated with respect by all of humanity. Whoever knows not how to do this, whoever desecrates what is sacred to a single human being, disrespects their own essence. The sacred is a way for man to connect with his essence. And anyone who does not respect this is desecrating not the essence of the other, but their own. We must understand that even a stone placed upon another, which a very primitive man used to represent God, deserves respect. Therefore, let's approach this with great care and affection. Here we have a sacred work. Well, the first instance, then, delves into Arjuna's first question, which is obviously how to know Brahman, who is one. In other words, how to know unity. We are in a world of multiplicities, of dualities, where things are constantly opposing each other. Everything is divided. How do we come to know unity? If we have a practical, concrete mind that lacks the ability to see unity, it knows things by their attributes. The attributes of things are divisions. This is small, that is large, so they are different, they are separate. Our mind could hardly understand, I think it is even impossible, a being that encompasses all attributes within itself. And that is Brahma, the One. The mind gets confused, it needs to separate to understand. If this is small, it cannot be large. If this is soft, it cannot be strong. If this is round, it cannot be square. So it breaks down, it divides, it dissects to understand. Arjuna asks Krishna, how do I understand the One? How can I comprehend Brahma itself? And Krishna begins to speak about the steps in a didactic way within Indian literature, using all the proper terms. I have replaced many things. He begins to explain that, first of all, it is about knowing and mastering the qualities of matter, to disidentify with it, and find the inner life, which is identical to Brahma. It seems complex, does it not? If you know a scientific principle called ceteris paribus, which means all other things, ceteris, all other things stable, so that you have only one variable and can analyze it, you can draw a parallel with this here. In other words, I want to analyze the temperature of a compound. All and everything else around it is stable, only that varies. Or an unknown in an equation, everything else is calm and known. Just one unknown. And you work and appreciate their variations and can understand. This is a bit of what Krishna is teaching Arjuna. Look here, take a moment. Get to know the laws of the world a bit, so you can understand the things that might affect you. Learn through the concentration of a higher mind, a more elevated mind, not to be a slave, a plaything in the hands of the appeals of matter, in such a way that you can retreat into an internal environment, where you are not disturbed, where you have an environment with soundproofing, where the voices of the world do not reach with their appeals. Through concentration, you build this, and within it, you begin to appreciate your mental forms, your feelings. You start to want to appreciate your true identity. Who am I in the midst of all this? I have mentioned in several talks to you that this is the etymology, intelliger, to choose among the many noises you have internalized. Who are you there? What is your thought? What is your feeling? What is your identity? What did you come to say to the world? Finding yourself amidst what you are not. This first element that I usually mention is intelligence. The greatest of all intelligences is identity. It is about finding oneself, the construction of one's own identity. So he says, master the qualities of matter, disidentify from them so that their appeals do not reach you, and find the inner life. When you through. A lot of practice, a lot of self-observation in your deepest reflections. Soon you will notice a very pure nature within yourself. One day, after much persistence, with perseverance and consistency, without giving up, you will, at a certain moment, perceive something very pure that lies behind these eyes that see the world. These eyes that see the world, at 10 years old see one thing, at 20, another, at 30, at 40, the scene keeps changing. But there is an observer deep down, behind these changing scenes, that is always the same, does not change, not one single bit. A silent observer that lives within you. When you learn after much effort, it is not a simple journey. To find this observer within you, you know a little about Brahma. As Helena Blavatsky beautifully puts it, who knows a drop of water knows the nature of the ocean. Who knows a man knows the nature of God. Do you see? It is the same being, but one is limited in space-time, and the other is unlimited, free, present in all things. But from the moment I know this drop of Brahma trapped within my vessel, which they call Jivatma, I can find Brahma himself everywhere. Later on, he will give exactly this example. It is like a bowl of water, which you compare to a great river. The difference is just that bowl isolating the water from the vast water that flows everywhere. One day, this bowl will cease to exist, and then this water will merge into that river. At this moment, it is necessary to find an identity that is ONT based solely on the bowl. but in the water, which the bowl differentiates for us, whether it's a round bowl, a square one, yellow, blue, it differentiates us, while the water unites us, gives a profound essence, and it makes us kin with the identity of the entire universe. Basically, the book will develop this concept. Continuing, he will say that consciousness must discover that immortal essence within itself. This is the supreme knowledge. Think about how interesting this is. This work is very strong in its critique of mere intellectual knowledge, which is horizontal and quantitative. Many phrases are placed in this context. As long as you do not incorporate the vertical dimension, you only have the horizontal dimension. You lack the depth to delve deep within yourself, nor to touch the highest of heavens. You do not transcend mere quantitative information. You do not acquire formation, nor transformation, which is the necessary. So, he will say that true knowledge is exactly that. Discover this immortal essence within yourself. Discover the water within this bowl. This water, which is identical to the rivers, the lakes, the ocean itself. Mastery of objective thought, Krishna responds that it is one of the most important things. What does that mean? To have control over what you think. This is extremely complicated for people like us who are not educated for this, and they always believed that thought is their essence. That, therefore, to repress it would be to repress oneself. And today, when I reach an age like mine, in general, I see this. Goes crazy because they cannot concentrate on anything. They have not acquired this habit. And the mind spins all the time on 1,000 things and can't take control of its own thoughts. Cannot elevate it, becomes addicted to thinking about trivial things. At any age, one can begin this training to take control of their thoughts. Because it is through it that you can. It is the laser that will allow you to penetrate deeply into things. But when scattered, you don't have a laser beam. You have a light that spreads to all corners. You have to focus it on a single point, so it has the power to penetrate. So, the possibility of training one's own mind with concentration exercises, with the habit of reflection, is one of the strong elements here. Denial of material living conditions. It is not a definitive denial. I will not live anymore. No, but when I set aside time for a dialogue with my soul, I talk a lot about this in Plato. They are called the divine leisure. This moment is with me. That I have the ability to recognize all the tricks the material world uses to lure me out and say no. I am able to control the calls of the world. I know the tools of the world. He calls them tattvas. I know the tattvas. I know how the world tries to trap me, to attract me. So, he's not talking about exotic things. He is talking about you. You should know. Begin to conduct a deeper study, which is to understand something about thirst, hunger, the desire to go, the sleepiness, the urge to see what is happening on the street, the memory of a bunch of things you've forgotten. And if they are the tattvas, the calls of the world's circumstances, so that you do not enter at this fundamental point, it is as if there are a series of trials to be overcome. You are completely at the mercy of this tattva, completely at its mercy. You are a plaything in the hands of these circumstances, which keep pulling you here and there, and do not let you go to another, a single place, inward. They pull you in all directions, to all polarities, to prevent you from going to a single place, inward. So, when you decide to focus and try to find that inner point, it is heavy artillery. And if you do not learn to deal with these things, to know how to say no and hold your ground, you will also face difficulties. Now let me tell you, everyone starts like this. Keeps moving forward. I am not going to tell you that I have achieved great things. Almost nothing. And you keep moving forward. Today it did not work out. Tomorrow it will. Tomorrow you manage 30 seconds. The day after, tomorrow 35. Keep fighting against the circumstances. It is like exercise for someone who has always been idle. Building muscle takes time, and it requires perseverance and consistency. But know how to celebrate each small achievement. Today, I managed 10 seconds of concentration. Excellent. Have patience with yourself. It is a training, and it's a type of muscle building. Whoever started from. with complete idleness, began to train some kind of physical discipline, knows that this is not easy. Well, continuing, he will say, then, mastery of thought, purpose, denial of material life conditions, this allows one to reach samadhi. Samadhi is a state of higher consciousness. Beyond this mundane awareness, which allows you're observing a point, you're looking at a point, which is trying to understand unity, trying to understand the spirit. The state of samadhi is such an elevated consciousness, where you, the observer, and the observed thing merge into one. At a certain moment, it is as if I wanted to understand the screen. I look at it from the outside. Imagine yourselves in a situation where I could feel myself and this screen as one. I start to think of myself as the screen. Feeling the discomfort, perhaps from the dust on top, feeling the discomfort of not being treated as well as I would like. In other words, you see the other through themselves. It is the pinnacle of an almost transcendent empathy. You see the other from within themselves. In other words, samadhi, to a certain extent, overcomes the heresy of separateness. You perceive yourself and the other as one, like two cells of God, of unity, that then come together and form a molecule momentarily. In other words, it is a higher consciousness that can indeed penetrate deeply into the heart of things. Many times, many of the books I have read to you, in the books we've discussed, came precisely from this observation. I used to feel sad to see, for example, The Prophet of Khalil Gibran. Almost everyone I asked had already read it, and almost everyone I asked had not understood it. And they would say, well, it is very difficult. I can't believe it. I do not find the Prophet difficult. What is missing is the people. When faced with an intellectual challenge, they say, I will dedicate myself to this and delve deeper. To find the depth of this work, if I do not dive into myself, I will not find its depth. As the medieval alchemists used to say, the alchemical operation that transforms lead into gold. It cannot just be happening inside the crucible of the laboratory of the Athenor. It must be happening within the alchemists themselves. If things do not happen in both worlds, they do not happen in any world. That is why it was said that very few achieve success. So if you want to understand something complex, you have to seek depth from that, seeking depth within yourself as well. A person who has the habit of reflection, who has the spirit of a learner, who is curious about the mysteries of life, well, he insists until the doors open. I have a bit of fear about this inertia people have towards everything that is profound. I do try to simplify things to encourage you to take the next step. But there must be an effort, as Helena Blavatsky herself used to say, when at a certain point she creates a work that simplifies her own ideas, but she says, look, the karma of mental development is also a fact. It requires effort. Continuing then, he will say that when a person manages to reach samadhi, he plants within his heart the object of his knowledge. In other words, seek to understand the spirit. A state of superconsciousness, which for us is far from samadhi, but everything that is above, so it is below, as Kybalion says, a little bit of that. We can achieve it through good concentration. He says that a bit of that knowledge begins to live in the heart of a person when they reach this samadhi. In other words, a bit of the spirit. Now it forms my very essence. It always composed, but now I have shed light on it. A bit of what I wanted to understand. Now it is not just an intellectual understanding. It is a piece of my identity. A piece of my identity is the Prophet. It is the UTTARA Gita. It is the Bhagavad Gita. Why? Because I found them within myself. I shed light. Otherwise, I would not have understood them externally. I doubt you will find someone who is profound in anything if they are superficial about themselves. It is a matter of parallelism. So, shedding light both outside and inside, at the same time, that begins to live within your heart. It becomes a part of you when it comes to something profound. Of course, to cross the current of a river, you need a boat. But once you reach the other shore, the boat is no longer necessary. That is quite interesting. An introduction, a reasoning that he will develop much further ahead. Pay attention to this next part. Just as the farmer throws away the husk to sow the grain in the soil, the discerning person casts away the study of books when one acquires the knowledge from books. The Vedas are unnecessary for the person who already knows the supreme divinity. The Vedas, the most sacred text for the Hindu tradition. In other words, when a person reaches the heart of things, the means that brought them there are no longer necessary. When you reach the other side of the river, the boat is no longer needed. You will not carry it on your back. It is interesting because he realizes that the intellectual process of knowing things, the process that only knows the letter, only knows the form of things. When you grasp the essence, that form is no longer necessary. It would not be right for a man to say of himself, "I know," simply because he has read many books. But how much of these books has become a part of his own heart? How many of these books, the essence of these books, did it awaken in him a knowledge of his own identity? How much light did he bring into himself and consequently into the world through reading these books? Otherwise, he is simply a man who has a boat. And he will never want to give up that boat because it is all he has. He has not become a good traveler. He has not learned to cross rivers. He only has the boat. Anything you ask him, he will say, "I read it in such and such book." And you ask, "But what have you experienced from that? How has that transformed your life? What did that bring to the light for you that made you a more complete being?" And he has no answer for that. So it becomes knowledge in this way, more of an obstacle to human evolution than an actual help. How many books have you read? How many books have you delved into their mystery and awakened something within you? That would be the right question. Continuing, he will say, "Thrice blessed is the yogi who has quenched his thirst with the nectar of knowledge." He will no longer be subject to karma and becomes a knower of the tattvas. Look at that. Imagine we have a mindset in the West. That karma, cause and effect, is basically that. It is the law of cause and effect on various planes. It is a punishment for the wrong things we have done. And, in truth, karma is not punitive. It is educational. It makes a person endure suffering so they can move forward, so they can let go of their blindness, so they can let go of their ignorance. Once you have seen it, there is no point in keeping pressure on you. From the moment you have learned, there's no longer a reason to pressure you to go through trials again, to suffer when the fruit of the entire journey is already in your hands. So, the person who sees the mystery of life finds this duality between essence and appearance, understands the necessity of both, lives in these two worlds, but does not let themselves be deceived, knows that this essence is interwoven through all appearances, that everything has a divine essence, understands the necessity of this illusory world, the world of Maya, the Mayavic world, as stated in Indian tradition, knows how to navigate well in both worlds, but does not lose their sense of reality. This person has seen, learned, and lives. For this, karma is extinguished. It is what is called karmic redemption. There is nothing more to learn. And why karma? What more would karma bring? The great educator, which is karma, has already taught. Their disciple is already awakened. The true meaning of the Vedas is understood by those who recognize the ineffable pranav as the incessant sound of the great symbol. I found this phrase beautiful, and I am going to explain it so you can find it beautiful too. Pranav is a type of praise. Pranav is a type of devotion. It is truly a praise, in recognition of the divine. From the moment a person understands the meaning of the Vedas, from the moment they grasp the essence of things, who is a good knower, a great knower, perceives this constant sound of the symbol that resonates in the universe. He perceives the sound that is expressed through all his vehicles, all his earthly instruments. He realizes that behind all the voices, which are truly voices and not just noises, there is a single voice expressing itself there. In other words, this, pranav, which is the praise. He stands before the mystery, which is yet to be perceived. And by believing so much that there is a unity speaking various languages through many mouths, he comes to understand this language. he comes to hear it. And then this one indeed. He absorbed the essence of the Vedas, absorbed the essence of all knowledge. I had an interesting experience a few years ago, and it reminded me a lot that today. It brought, as always, small and very simple experiences, because philosophers of our stature, what we have are small experiences. That I like to share to show you that it is something perfectly livable by anyone. There is a philosopher that I like a lot. Who is Sri Ram? And there is a passage of one of his books, which I mentioned on YouTube, Seeking Wisdom, where he says that at any moment, a person who perceives, or at least is willing to perceive, that eternity exists, that unity exists, at any moment in time when they focus, they can open a crack and see eternity. Even if just for a second. This gives you a conception that you no longer perceive. You no longer become a plaything in the hands of the traps of time, in the hands of things that pass. No longer suffers from the things that pass, which is the main cause of human suffering. So much so that things are fleeting, the things he loves, what he himself is. In a second when you perceive eternity, but first, you have to give it a vote of confidence. Focus on time, sand the breach. I remember that I received a beautiful record, which I still keep with me, by Palestrina, a very talented Renaissance musician, and I listened to Missa Breves. It was an apartment building where I lived at the time. I lived here in Brasilia, in Asa Sol, and the place where I lived was quite busy. Out on the street, a guy would pass by shouting, "Get your pneumonia," and it had rained the night before and cars were passing by, and making that peculiar noise that cars make when they pass over a wet road, and that jolt from the speed bump, and the sounds of people talking below, of children, and for a second, I do not know, maybe because I really wanted it. For a second, I began to perceive Palestrina's music. Palestrina's music is like entering, like being a paparazzi in the world of angels. I felt that way. The Missa Breves is like being a paparazzi in the world of angels. You walked in and see them gathered there, completely ignoring you. And maybe you will be kicked out if they see you. In other words, it is something celestial. I began to feel those noises blending into Palestrina's music and compose. It was as if the music were expanding, and the sound of the man shouting, get your pneumonia, rhymed with the voice of one of those angels. And the noise of the cars on the street, that sound of water vibrating with the passing of the car's wheel, all of it blended together perfectly. And the voices of the people, and the honking of a distant car, all of that was entering and being absorbed by the music. Absorbed in such a way that all of that exterior music could fit inside. And that scared me, of course, because it is a strange feeling, few. And I awoke from this little dream of mine. But it was in a moment of pause, sought with Pranav, with a desire to see, that allowed me to have a glimpse. Well, things are like that too. There is a state of consciousness that is like Palestrina's music, that expands your vision in such a way that everything fits in there without any disharmony. A simple experience which anyone can have, as long as they take it as a possibility and want to see this other aspect of life. We are so interested in so many things. Everyone wants to stay updated with the news of the day. And these things, which are so much more important, remain on the fringes of our interests. Observe that. Is it possible to open this crack in time and perceive a point where everything comes together? Who knows? If you look at nature, this even resulted in an article. I wrote about it back then. You look at nature and are dazzled by those little birds that seem crazy in the morning. It seems like they're living in a grand spectacle that you're not noticing because you're asleep. And the leaves swaying and a whole ensemble of morning sounds. If you stop to focus there, maybe you will realize that it is merely an accompaniment. An orchestral accompaniment for a voice, a solo voice that is behind it all. That perhaps, due to alienation, we do not notice. But you notice that this accompaniment is very well tuned, that it all integrates with itself. There is no dissonance. When a bird cries out, when the trees rattle, and when the rooster crows, it is like a very well-rehearsed accompaniment. For a voice, for the song of life, as the light on the path says, which we have not yet learned to perceive. Who knows? The birds notice, the trees notice. If we push ourselves a little, who knows? This is the song of life. We must know how to stop, seek, and perceive. That before anything else, give a chance for these things to be real. Otherwise, our practical and intellectual mind will say, "You have gone mad." There is nothing serious about it, nor are there any contraindications. You try to quietly observe the sounds of nature around you for a bit, trying to pause your mind a little, trying to silence the tattvas, the calls of material life. It is a good experience. At the very least, it will give you an excellent morning relaxation. Continuing still in the first instance, in the first stage, there's this phrase that I found very beautiful as well. Who makes their own Atma and Arani? Arani is a piece of wood whose friction produces fire. You must have seen those two pieces of wood that are rubbed together until they produce fire. And from pranav, which is praise, he makes another arraign, fictionalizing them very constantly. Soon the fire is seen. In the same way, the hidden fire emerges within the errands. Atma, in the Hindu tradition, is what you have that is most divine, most sublime. And for Nava, this perception, this inclination to perceive the oneness. So, it is as if you take the divine within you, the little bit you are aware of, your highest virtues, your noblest thoughts, your purest feelings, and began to flex them with. This inclination to see the divine as a whole, this inclination to see God in all things, and it says that this, at a certain moment, will spark a fire. And fire is pure knowledge. In other words, knowing how to master the influences of the environment, diving within oneself, finding a bit of your own identity, and at a certain moment, through it, like a channel, find a bit of the unity in the universe. The path leads towards this unity and the whole becoming one. But it starts there. You are talking about a great sage. Of course, this is spoken for great sages who are dedicated to a lifetime of devotion. But remember what is above and below. At our level, it is also applicable. Try to find your highest and deepest identity, and at the same time, generate a silent phrase to all the harmony you see around you, as if you bowed before it, wanting to see what lies beyond. At a certain moment, these two things connect. And then, he says, the process of wisdom begins. The channels begin to open. Contrast generates awareness, a theory called the theory of impact. And then we have the two errands. The two pieces of wood which rub against each other and awaken consciousness. In other words, the perception of God in the whole and the perception of God within me. They rub against each other and generate fire. We will realize that this concept of the two pieces of wood, the two errands, intertwined, rubbing against each other, giving birth to the divine child is very present in India. Thus, Agni, the fire, is born, two crossed logs, and then the divine child is born. This is very powerful. This divine child also represents, among many other symbolisms, the birth of the divine within us. It is a symbolism that comes from far back. Another phrase, still from chapter 1. Until a person does not see within themselves the sublime form that is purer than purity itself, must continue their meditations, focusing their thoughts on that form. Understood? Until you see within yourself a form that is purer than purity itself, you must keep searching because, by definition, it is there. It is interesting because he says, imagine this form. It is still a form. It is within our body. It is within our mind. It is a form. You have to believe that it exists. This reminds me of the pranav. Assume that it is there. Imagine what it might be like and work to see it. Imagination and will together. You will see. It is no wonder that Plato often spoke about having a hero to admire. Certainly, so that we could imagine the greatest perfection a human being can achieve, so that later you would find it within yourself. He said, those who do not cultivate the memory of heroes. What will they cultivate? You will start to cultivate models because we need to have models for building ourselves. You'll start cultivating vulgar models, grotesque. So, this need to work with imagination and will to imagine something like a pure diamond, raw, resilient, unyielding. Nothing can affect it. It exists within me. And set that as a goal. I will see, I will see, I will see. Prepare yourself to see. Until, little by little, you begin to notice your own attributes. Of course, divine attributes are present in all of creation. Why not within us? And from the moment you find them within yourself, the possibility of perceiving it in all things. When I see myself in depth, I am profound in all things. Through the vision of myself, I see God in all things. Continuing, he will say, thus the Jivatma, which is the individualized spirit within us. This spirit that is within the little bowl. It is capable of penetrating the entire universe, this great spirit. It also penetrates our body. It is also here. We are not an empty vessel. Thus, the Atma, dweller of the caves of Manu. Invisible and unfathomable, it becomes its own manifester and spreads throughout the human heart's chamber. The Atma, which is this divine essence within us, is trapped in the caves of Manu, which is the illusory world, the manifested world with its illusions. There comes a certain moment when it presents itself to us. It appears before the eyes of our consciousness. And from there, a person can begin to perceive God in all things we see. God in all things, when wisdom reveals God within us. Through this, we can see him in all things. Who, after purifying the mind, contemplates the pure Paratman, which is God in everything, while the Atma or Jivatma is God only within the individual. Who, after purifying the mind, contemplates the pure Paramatman and looks within their own being as the vast and undivided whole of the manifested universe, becomes happy through the knowledge of Brahma. You perceive yourself as a perfect cell of the One. It is the drop of water that perceives itself as a perfect part of the ocean. You are able to perceive this identity between the individual self and the great I. Without limits, realize that they are of the same nature. We think about what we like or what we are led to like. It is not natural for us to have this tendency to elevate our consciousness. Our consciousness lives very low. It is something I would like you to notice. And not only that, due to our tendency, because of the lack of necessary education and training. Yes, we do have this tendency. We live in a cultural moment where this is heavily influenced. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and feel it within me, like an intoxication, because it is such a bombardment of information. No matter how much I try to escape them, they chase us everywhere, all of them with disastrous, vulgar, violent content. There comes a point where you no longer have control over your mind. She can only look down. It develops a morbid habit, only able to focus on trash, on violence, on everything negative. When you try to elevate it, it shows a certain resistance to the elevated. Notice this in your relationships. If you talk about one of your flaws to someone, people laugh, they find it funny, and say, "Oh, I'm like that too. I have that too." Try talking about a small virtue you're cultivating, and people will wrinkle their noses and say, "Oh, you're vain. Weird thing you think you're all that, huh?" In other words, it's almost forbidden to talk about the luminous, about the dark at ease. We are still bombarded by the dark. How will you elevate your consciousness to awaken it in your mind? Find yourself within. And then, through this essence, see God and see the other. And unify the universe and overcome separateness. How will you do that if your consciousness has a habit of tending to fall? There is an addiction to the theory of gravity in psychological planes. Whenever you let it go, does it always fall downward? Notice that there is something here. Be more attentive to the things that drag our consciousness down, including some of the traps of the times we live in. How many times do people ask me, "Are you a well-informed person?" I have my own way of being well-informed. The news that interests me is the one that is somehow relevant, either because I can help or because I can learn something from it to become a better human being, or better yet, because I can intervene in a way to improve it. Not just a disastrous thing, morbid, that has already happened, about which I can do nothing, and whose knowledge will only contaminate my mind. Notice that being called well-informed these days almost becomes a trap to make you constantly look at the garbage. Gosh, if I skip reading today's newspaper, I won't know what happened in politics. Just between us, I really do not like discussing politics, and very few things there truly catch my attention. I draw your attention to a chapter from the book The Posthumous Memoirs of Bras Cubas. Machado de Assis was a great philosopher. I truly insist on this, which is called The Old Dialogue of Adam and Eve, which was a dialogue between Bras Cubas and the woman of his life, who was Eugenia. He writes a chapter that is all dashes, 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 question mark, dashes, 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 ellipsis, dashes, 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 exclamation mark. In other words, it is obvious what is being said. He fills in those dashes however you want, because it is obvious what is being said. I find it curious, sometimes, within the vast majority of political news from Brazil, the world, everywhere, how it starts to resemble the old dialogue of Adam and Eve. Predictable, predictable. It has turned into a big gossip session where there is always someone accusing the other. There is nothing very relevant, nothing very constructive, that very rarely occurs, in such a way that you can go a month without reading political news. When you simply look at the fact that was generated to speak well or poorly of it, it is a little different, but the tone is exactly the same. I have this feeling that if I left the planet for 30 years, I would come back, and I would be up to date with political news, because it continues to be the old dialogue between Adam and Eve. Think carefully about what you consider on being well informed. If I invite you to sit with me on a bench to discuss how unity fits within Palestrina's Missa Brevis, would you have time for that? Would you be excited? Would you be interested? If we were to talk about how to overcome these barriers that hold us back, that drag our consciousness down, are you interested in this topic? Try to cultivate more of this type of interest, because that is what makes a well-informed person, who knows what is good, necessary, and useful, which is the story attributed to Socrates, the story of the three sieves, knows what is truly worth knowing. Beware of this great bluff of the well-informed man. Our consciousness ends up being completely occupied on trivialities. That has this tone of being important, but deep down, there is absolutely nothing important about it. What is important is something that, in some way, can bring me a good reflection, bring me growth, or something on which I can intervene and bring about some growth. Something that is relevant in the sense that learning it allowed me to understand life better. Mere gossip of all kinds with the appearance of something serious, be careful with that, be careful with. These counterweights that hold your consciousness, these anchors that bind your consciousness, that pull us down. We have to rise, we came here to ascend. There is a lot of interesting things to see on the next floors. This is a book for those who want to ascend to the next floors. Where do the virtues and vices of man go? And who accompanies them when a man dies? Arjuna asks, all that I have built and has not built it. The virtues I have acquired, the vices I could not overcome, where does all of this go? And Krishna responds, they accompany the jiva, which is the individual spirit, as long as it remains in ignorance of the tattvas. As long as man does not have complete knowledge of the things of the world's temptations, and cannot overcome them, and cannot see the spiritual world, it goes there and sees nothing because it doesn't recognize that world. When consciousness detaches from the material world, when it leaves its body, and everything it knew was recognized through that body, it moves to another plane where it recognizes nothing. It is as if it were asleep, according to this tradition, and this dormant consciousness remains attached, like Snow White, surrounded by her little dwarfs, her flaws and virtues, waiting for her to awaken once more, to continue moving in the direction of harmonizing all of this, inside and out. And it only awakens in the material world. This consciousness does not know how to awaken in the spiritual realm, still does not see. In this plane, one needs to walk more upon the earth. This is Krishna's answer. No one can know Brahma as they do not become as pure as Brahma itself. In other words, when you find within yourself something so pure that gives you such a serene peace of mind, that you say, I am this. I am Brahma, as this tradition says. I am this. Therefore, there is nothing and no one that can take away or add anything to me. There's no reason to rush, no reason to be anxious. It's simply to reveal this nature to the world. It only comes for this. And time is nothing more than one opportunity after another for conquering it and then revealing it to the world. Life becomes extremely simple in a state of peace of mind that no one can take away from you. It is found. This is the moment of supreme realization for the human being. I brought a quote here that I find very interesting, which is from the other book I have already mentioned, The Light on the Path, which this context reminded me of quite a bit. Keep yourself alone and isolated, for nothing that is not eternal should come to meet you. There comes a time when you have to do this. Create a capsule where you keep yourself alone and isolated, and nothing that is not eternal can come to meet you. The things that touch you there, beauty, goodness, truth, justice, these will help you find yourself. These are eternal. Trivialities will not enter this capsule. Am I going to live eternally alone and isolated? No. I came into the world in order to distribute these human gifts that have been given to me, but first I need to find them, or two things in parallel. The little that I've already found, I share as I walk. Because if you wait to find everything, you end up doing absolutely nothing. The little that you have already found, share it along the way. But you must have this time of divine leisure of inner life, where nothing that is not eternal can come to meet you. I was talking this week with some people, and I even gave a lecture where I mentioned this, something I experienced recently. An experience that was very special. Someone, an old friend, asked me to write a few words that she could give to a friend who was in his final days, agonizing, in the last moments of life. And writing this small letter, this little note of 3 paragraphs, was for me a philosophical experience, terrible, but at the same time immensely rich. For me, it became clear that the only thing that can bring solace to a man in a circumstance like this is a drop of eternity. If you do not have it, you have nothing to give to him. And then you are compelled to find eternity within your life. You will seek. Is true love eternal? Yes. Is goodness eternal? Yes. Fraternity is eternal? Yes. But how much true goodness, true love, and true fraternity do I find within my life? When you dive into your memory of life experiences, you will notice how they are tainted. With the desire to be recognized by others or by God, with the desire to settle some debts from past mistakes, in other words, selfishness. I want to rid myself of these responsibilities for what I have done. Everything is very contaminated with other interests. While true goodness is done for its own sake, simply for that feeling of aligning with your own nature, the sense of fulfillment that an act of kindness gives you. When you go looking for it, that it is a jewel in your life. It is extremely rare, and when you find it, it is a precious stone. If you have a little bit of the eternal within you, time will not be able to take it away. You have things that nothing and no one can touch. So, finding elements of eternity within oneself, searching, and even the fact of not finding much is a valuable realization, because it is time to start building. So this was a very powerful experience that I would like to share with you, and it fits perfectly with this sacred book we are studying. One of man's goals should be to find a bit of eternity within himself. And as the UTTARA Gita says, to find your own essence, which is of the same nature as goodness, as justice, as fraternity, as love. It is eternal. Finding episodes of these attributes within yourself, genuine, without ulterior motives, they signal who your true identity is. Because if you had a moment of genuine love, it was your true self that experienced it. You had a moment of genuine kindness. It was your true self that experienced it. This signals the meeting with oneself. Second instance, we are almost finished. The one in whom the light of knowledge always shines with the fire of wisdom is capable of burning the bonds of karma. Look at this. Karma is inexorable, in quotes, for there is karmic redemption. Who saw it do not need to suffer from karma to see, As we mentioned earlier, wherever passes away, or rather, wherever a Dinanine, who is a knower, dies, regardless of the manner of their death, joins the whole, just like the water from a vessel merges with the universal ocean. When the vessel breaks, no matter when or how it breaks. It is that we talked about earlier. Any knower, when they die, is not lost, but rather finds his place within the whole. From the moment he shed light on what he is, this essence of yours finds its peers. Not by chance that Heraclitus said that those awake share a common world, while those who sleep return to their own private worlds. The one who has found the divine essence within themselves, even when the vessels break. This essence finds its place, it is not lost. Whoever was able to rest their thoughts for an instant, on a single point, which is unity, free yourself from the guilt of your countless past births. Do you understand this? For a second, I glimpse that there is a unity, and I am part of it. When you return, does it make sense to discriminate against things? Does it make sense to mistreat things? Does it make sense to disregard them? Once they are part of you, you saw. As if my hand started to mistreat my foot. It does not make sense. Everything is part of a single body. And if I glimpse, even just once, a single body, there can be no war among the members of that body. There can be no disunity, no estrangement. In other words, a second visualizing this point, deeply understanding the nature of this point. When you return to the world, separateness no longer exists. The tragedies of the world no longer exist, and gets free from the guilt of your countless births. It is said that the Bhagavad Gita speaks about this heresy of separateness, the voice of the silence, speaks about this heresy of separateness and says that by overcoming it, by realizing that we are all one, there is no longer a need for experiences in the world. We overcome the need to be here, and we will only be here if it is to enlighten others, because now we have the true light. Those who incessantly chant the 4 Vedas and read other sacred texts, but falter in realizing, I am Brahma, are like the ladles used in stews, which do not taste the food they prepare. Curious, isn't it? Almost identical to the Dhammapada, saying that the spoon perceives nothing of the soup, while the tongue perceives everything about the soup. That our knowledge should be like that of the tongue, not the spoon. In other words, he is talking about the Vedas, which are the most sacred of Indian texts. There is no point in reciting it 1,000 times. It will be like this: a spoon that tastes the stew knows nothing of it, even though it is in contact. Like the donkey carrying sandalwood logs, feeling only the weight of the load on its back and not the fragrance of the wood. Thus, those who constantly read the sacred texts and do not understand their true meaning, carry them in their minds as beasts of burden. Gosh, how powerful! It is a sacred book. Those who do not sense the fragrance of the sacred books, but memorize them, carry them, hold them in their minds like beasts of burden. They do not enjoy the fragrance of the sandalwood. They are simply logs of wood, heavy, not aromatic. Just as the milk from all cows is of the same color, even though they have different fur, similarly, in the case of jiva, bodies may be different. But in all resides the Atma, one and identical. In other words, no matter how much appearances may differ, because we live in a world of differentiations. The essence is one, it is singular. It is like the thread that runs through the beads of a necklace. Is only one, even though the beads are many. Food, sleep, fear, and sexual desire. Man shares all these things with the beasts. The ability to discern, residing in buddhi, which is the higher intelligence, is the only thing that makes a man truly human. Food, sleep, fear, and sexual desire he shares with the beasts. A higher, intuitive intelligence, which is buddhi, is the only thing that humanizes him. Therefore, if one is stripped of this faculty, this higher intelligence, they will become identical to the beasts. If this higher intelligence has not been awakened, one has never ceased to be like the beasts. It is a human shell with human potential, but within which the true human is asleep. Only the brute is alive, and only it commands. In other words, it is necessary to have the ability to look from above and discern what exists within us, with the eyes of human consciousness, with the eyes of wisdom. When arises that state of Advaita, which is a tradition, one of the school, of the characteristics of the Indian Vedanta school, which is the one that does not admit divisions. It is monistic, works with unity. When that state of Advaita arises, which is the transcendence of duality, through which one feels everything in the one and the one in everything, then one dwells at the supreme feet of Brahma. You are already at the feet of Brahma. When you see God in all things, and within all things, you are able to perceive God. In other words, unity has surpassed the dualistic view of the world. And finally, the third instance. The sacred rivers are nothing but water, and the idols that are worshipped are nothing but stone, metal, or earth. Fire is the god of the initiates who offer sacrifices. The munis-calder god is Atma, which resides within them. The common folk worship images, but the knower sees God equally in the fire, in their being, in idols, and everywhere. Knower sees God in all things, including within oneself. The blind in understanding and spirit cannot perceive omnipresence and eternal peace. That encompasses the entire universe. It is no use realizing that the divine exists within us or believing that it does if we are not conscious of it. It is like being hungry with money in your pocket, but not knowing it is there. That money is of no use. You will remain hungry. It is of no use to have within us the attribute of the supreme peace if we are not conscious of it. We live in supreme conflict, which is more or less what we experience in our days. The thought of spirituality, even for a brief moment, is far more effective than 1,000 millions of sacrifices. They use this figure. Quantity does not become more true nor deeper as it expands. Quality, depth, even just a millimeter. It already gives you something that quantity could never provide. The one who sees and understands has a much greater spiritual depth than someone who has read all the sacred works and every book in the world, and did nothing with it. It is merely the beast of burden, with the weight of logs on its back. Once I brought you this quote from Leonardo da Vinci because I think it fits perfectly here, which is attributed to Leonardo. I do not know if it belongs to the Codex Atlanticus, but either way, it is beautiful and fits very well here. Once you have experienced flying, you will walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward, for there you have been, and there you will long to return. Leonardo da Vinci. Do you realize this? Which is more or less the same idea expressed by a genius. In other words, you glimpse the depth for a second. When you return to this world, you are no longer an ordinary person. You are someone who is certain of the depth. You are certain of eternity. You are certain of existence of the One. You return to the world, but always looking towards the place where you have been, even if just for a second, and knowing that life is more than this. You are a man who has lifted the veils of Maya. Finally, he concludes in this third book by saying the following: "Oh, Arjuna, the one who does not covet material goods never returns to be reborn in this world. The one who covets nothing that comes from the tattvas, the gifts of the earth. There is no reason to live in a world that no longer has anything to offer you. The one who longs for being longs to find the essence of being. Naturally, it reaches fraternity, overcomes all separations, and finds its divine essence in all beings, like the Sutratma tradition, which is that thread running through the beads of a necklace. A bead on a necklace, when it finds its essence, soon after, it will find the thread. Will realize that your essence is shared with all the beads of the universe's necklace. Therefore, it is natural for her to dedicate herself to what is a part of her. Understanding, wisdom, allows for true fraternity, true union, and the perception of unity as the only reality of this world, the only reality of the manifested universe. And that is it. I hope you all enjoyed it. As I mentioned, it is a small excerpt. I took some elements and explained them, trying to bring it into a more understandable language. but notice that it is a very strong call for the awakening of human consciousness about what we came here to do. What should we know? Where is our life heading, or where should it be heading? And to place before us the possibility of positioning ourselves for this, an old treatise, an ancient treatise, with truths still so new, so unprecedented, that we still have much work to do to understand. I hope this holds value for you. Thank you,